Unitarian Universalism can be said to be born from the forces of curiosity and criticism, or blasphemy and heresy. In the time of the Council of Nicaea, Arius questioned the divinity of Christ and disagreed with the notion that God could be three distinct forms and identities. The divine is one, indivisible, holy, and whole, he argued. Alas, he lost that argument to an ill-tempered bishop of Turkey, who later was sainted and transformed into a beloved folk story that remains viable to this day. But that is a story for another time. Arius was the first dissenter of significant note to be recorded in history. Many others came after him, mostly unnoted in historical records, some remembered for the various cruel and brutal ways they were dispatched by the church authorities of their age. The notion of church is a complex thing. In simplest terms, it is a vehicle through which people can gather to have a shared experience of the divine. Depending on how you perceive divinity, that experience can take any of a myriad of forms, from chanting with prayer beads to burning incense, singing, shouting, being slain in the spirit, or meditating in silence, engaging in intellectual discourse, seeing visions, or spending time in nature. In past and present, church has also served as a means through which people formed communities and cultures of shared experience and shared values. Churches have long been viewed as authorities on moral issues, and in many cases have emerged as governing bodies in public spaces. In communities where all members are in agreement with such a system, I suppose that can work. But rarely is criticism permitted. To question the authority of leaders in this sort of situation is to question the authority of God. And that can be a mortal offense. In an odd sort of pattern, many religions emerge as resistance or reform movements against some oppressive or outdated form of cultural norms or governmental rules. The Buddha left his life of wealth and comfort to seek enlightenment through asceticism and meditative practice. His desire to seek a deeper spiritual understanding of life caused him to remove himself from his culture of origin and seek out a new life where he would gain new perspectives. Jesus did not leave Judaism to start Christianity. His work was to reform Judaism, to remove the holy work of the temple from its comfortable relationship with civil authorities that allowed injustice to flourish. Heaven knows Martin Luther did not seek to create 1,000 new Christian denominations called Protestantism. He wanted to reform the Catholic Church to its original beginnings in the teachings and lessons of Jesus, albeit with a very strict hand. These examples show in a general way what happens when thoughts diverge and people are faced with a choice to remain in a system that is reluctant to change, or leave to establish a new system based on new ideas that the old found too challenging to tolerate. So this is what caused Unitarians to leave Orthodox Christianity that espoused a triune God. This is what caused Universalists to depart from Christian denominations that relied upon the threat of hell or the lure of heaven to enforce their rules. And so humanists departed from a number of religious affiliations to establish a new organization devoted to the betterment of humanity through human effort, not reliant upon belief in a guiding supernatural force or an afterlife. Natural laws of physics and evolution and compassion were sufficient to form a set of goals that included various virtues and compassionate living, self-examination and self-correction when in error, and forward progress, onward and upward forever, as voiced by James Freeman Clarke. Now, in this case, these men were intentionally starting a new organization. They were not trying to reform where they came from. They were starting a new organization, a new system, and they were prepared to offer something unique, a place designed to grow with new developments and discoveries in science and understanding about humanity, ever seeking to accurately reflect reality and improve upon it. When their original version of the Humanist Manifesto proved insufficient to the changed and changing times, they updated it and then updated it again. With each revision, one can track the developing understanding of justice and compassion within global culture, including an understanding of systems of power and privilege that harm those with marginalized identity. One of the inherent charges in humanism is this commitment to change and growth. There is no tradition or creed to which one can hold fast when times are challenging. There is only the company and support of others who are similarly engaged. There's no one to pray to for strength, no external power to seek for guidance. When faced with large existential challenges, humanism demands self-examination with a critical eye, as one would examine and critique an avowed philosophy or an academic paper. The ego must be put aside in favor of learning truth, and that can be frightening and painful. I remember when I was going through a period of intense spiritual work in a recovery program, and I was faced with a set of beliefs and behaviors that had worked for me in the past, but clearly had ceased to be useful or healthy in my evolving spiritual growth. I was working with a mentor who continually encouraged and challenged me, at one point saying to my tearful complaints, "You're right where you're supposed to be in this process. All you have to do is be ready to change everything about yourself." I confess it was not among my favorite of our conversations, but it is true that the skills and identity I had developed as a child in an abusive home were ill-suited to creating and keeping the kinds of relationships I was seeking to form as a healthy adult. But those skills and those habits were all I knew how to do. And they were deeply connected to my understanding of who I was and who I knew myself to be. To examine them was to acknowledge how toxic and harmful my own behavior had been. And that was painful and scary. It was filled with shame. What will I be if I let go of my fear and my anger? Will there be anything left? This same process is still in play, I'll have you know, as I learn more and more about justice and privilege in my efforts as a minister to grow and become a more compassionate person. I have been deeply unsettled to uncover just how much white supremacist culture has benefited me in my life. More painful has been the understanding of just how many ways I have unconsciously upheld this system that is deeply unjust and benefits me personally. One of the hardest parts of this journey is when I realized how much of my own thinking is thoroughly integrated into white supremacist culture. And there are times that I fear that if I look too closely, I will be forced to acknowledge my own complicity in this system. And then what? A truth that is seen cannot be unseen. Faced with new information, I must change. I must change my behavior going forward, but I must also do what I can to repair and heal the harm I have done. There is a frequent battle within me between one side that says, but I like this, and the other side saying, yeah, that's privilege. There are times when I feel as though my whole identity as a decent and kind person will come tumbling down like a house of cards because it was built on the unfair privilege that I carry, that I was previously unaware of. I saw a Facebook meme this week that really hit home as I was writing this sermon. Maturing, it says, is realizing that you were toxic too. To which someone had replied, if you don't look back and cringe at your actions, you probably haven't been growing. Thinkers and seekers and those who are committed to living ethical lives must engage in this growth work, even though, perhaps especially because, it is so challenging and sometimes painful. It's very easy to be comfortable. But if our comfort comes at the exploitation and expense of someone else, we need to look at that. The charter and bylaws of the Unitarian Universalist Association, every organization has one, has a section called Article 2, in which is outlined language describing our principles, purposes, and commitment to the goals of inclusivity and freedom of belief. This is where the 7 principles are listed and the sources and that kind of stuff. So tucked into Article 2 is this following paragraph that really, really is powerful. Systems of power, privilege, and oppression have traditionally created barriers for persons and groups with particular identities, ages, abilities, and histories. We pledge to replace such barriers with ever-widening circles of solidarity and mutual respect. We strive to be an association of congregations that truly welcome all persons and commit to structuring congregational and associational life in ways that empower and enhance everyone's participation. Like the Humanist Manifesto, Article 2 sounds pretty straightforward, if academic and kind of dry, in its proclamation and promise to be inclusive. But that one little paragraph is far more potent than that. It acknowledges that systems of power create barriers to some folks and pledges to eliminate those barriers so that all can participate fully in our association. It has the effect of requiring a sort of a regular examination of our systemic commitment to our stated principles, which principles, purposes, and structures to make sure that we are, in fact, structuring congregational and associational life in ways that empower and enhance everyone's participation. In recent years, the UUA has created an Article 2 study commission and charged it with this work. The commission was created to be intentionally diverse and committed to giving space and authority to people who hold historically excluded identities. This group has been at this work for nigh on 3 years now and will present their findings to the UUA Board of Directors or Trustees in January so that their recommendations may be voted upon for the first time at our General Assembly in Pittsburgh next June. I have to think that this process, this Article 2 Commission thing, is not dissimilar from what the American Humanist Association has gone through in the 2 revisions of its manifesto. I wonder, though, if their organization experiences the anticipatory resistance that our association has encountered through this process. Remember, part of Article 2 says that we must revisit what it is that we believe and how we do it. That means looking at our 7 principles. And for people who claim to embrace freedom of thought, we resist mightily the notion that our principles might be imperfect or need adjustment to keep up with all that we have learned as human beings. In the past decade or so, maybe a little longer, there have been informal efforts from the floor of General Assembly. For those who don't know, General Assembly is a once-a-year, multi-day sort of conference thing where people representing congregations from all over the country and Canada come together and vote on important things to do with our denomination. So, articles of witness, changes to wording in policy. For a long time, there seemed to be some really recreational punctuation arguments going on. But so we all get together and do the big stuff on that one thing, right? So there have been efforts from the floor to make changes to some of our principles. One time there was an effort to change the language of our first principle to include the inherent worth and dignity of all beings, not just the human ones. That would include animals. The vegans were very much in favor of that. The cheeseburger folks were very much opposed. Another time, there was an effort to change or even eliminate altogether our fifth principle, which affirms the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large. Now, the complaint was not that democracy was a bad idea, merely that our version of it was really exclusive. In order to vote at General Assembly, one typically has to travel, sometimes via airplane, stay in a hotel, which I can tell you this past year in June, I went to GA, my hotel bill was $2,400 for a week, and then pay registration for General Assembly, which is in the hundreds of dollars. So that filters out who can really represent our congregations at our General Assembly. You really have to be affluent and have time in order to participate. In the last few years, there has been a new movement to add an eighth principle, which reads, "We, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote journeying toward spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions." A number of congregations have already passed that principle on their own. There's a study guide and a work through it process thing. And it has received preliminary support at General Assembly, but there's still an alarming amount of resistance to that proposal. Accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. I guess we can look at it and say that looks like a very good idea, but oh my God, it feels like exercise. I'm not sure I want to do that. Right? We are a religion made up of humans who resist change, even when it is for the progress and development of our own spiritual lives and the betterment of our world. Change is uncomfortable, painful even at times. I have long said that Newton's laws apply to human nature as well as the physical world, particularly when it comes to the law concerning inertia. An object at rest tends to stay at rest unless it is acted upon by some outside force. In the wisdom of the humanist part of our denomination, we must provide an internal force to move ourselves forward as we continue to grow and learn and develop as a religious movement. Newton also said that an object in motion tends to stay in motion unless it is acted upon by some outside force. I believe that once we get started, once we break free from our comfortable at-rest status with principles and purposes that have not undergone a significant update in several decades, once we get started, we will be more inclined to maintain forward progress than we would be to settle back into a place where our important documents become tradition-bound and unchangeable, so much like the creeds we decry. May our thirst for knowledge and greater understanding of our world compel us forward along the path toward inclusion, deepen our commitment to compassion, and inspire us to continue moving forward, always. Amen. I invite you now, this is where the